Tuesday. This is a first of a 2-day series of meetings. And this morning, for those of you that are joining us online, we'll probably recess at around noontime for subcommittee meetings, and then we'll resume again tomorrow morning at 9. And any business that any discussions we had or important items that we discussed during our afternoon subcommittee meetings will be reported tomorrow during our meeting, so you'll have the opportunity to know what business we have discussed at that time. So I want to welcome all of you here and hope that those of you that are visiting with us online will stay with us throughout the morning to listen to our discussion, our deliberations. And I'll turn it over to Margaret, my co-chair.
Good morning, everyone. Glad everyone's here, made it safely. I would like to draw your attention to the Applied Texas Advisory Committee list of members and ask that each of you review the list and make sure that all your information on there is correct. And if you would like, you can provide a telephone number and we can give that to Jane so that she can update the list at a later date. We'd also like to, at this time, go around the room and introduce ourselves. There are some new members here today that were not here at the last meeting, so we'll just go around the room and introduce ourselves, our name, and the school that we're from. I'll start with myself. Again, I'm Margaret Decken, and I'm from Texas A&M University, Corpus Christi.
I'm Elizabeth Garza, and I'm from the Alamo Colleges in San Antonio, Texas.
I'm Melinda Carroll, and I'm from North Central Texas College.
I'm Joy Frazier from the University of Texas at Arlington.
Lee Williams, Texarkana College.
Hi, I'm Christine Gann, Sam Houston State University.
Jarrell Booker, Coordinating Board.
Mary Smith, Coordinating Board.
Nidariano Hassan, Tyler Junior College.
Melissa Gallion, Lamar University.
Jamie Hansard, Texas Tech University.
Mary Beth Marks, Sul Ross State University.
Pearl Shin, University of Texas at Austin.
Okay, good.
Connie Garrick, Lone Star College.
Tim Bray, Supply Texas.
Brian Armstrong, Texas Southern.
Jane Caldwell, Coordinating Board.
Okay, thank you, everyone. And now I'd like to turn it over to Jane because she has some information she wants to share with us.
Good morning. This is my first meeting as liaison for this committee to the Coordinating Board, and I'm excited, terrified, and all at the same time. I am very pleased to be working with this group, and we should have a couple of very, very interesting days. For those of you who are not familiar with this building, the restrooms are located in this main aisle, right in the center. You can find placards overhead to find them. We do have coffee and homemade cookies over here this morning if anyone would like it. But there is a, what would you call that? Lounge? Break room. Thank you. It isn't a lounge. There are no couches. So yeah, there's a break room just this side of the double doors that you came through to come into the main hall on the right. And we will serve lunch probably 11:30ish or so, which brings up the need for you to please pay for the lunches that you have. You should have had a receipt with your name tag and an envelope to put your funds in. The gentleman sitting over there is Raul Jaimes, and he needs to receive your funds this morning as soon as possible. And so if you would put it in and then maybe pass it down to this end of the rows and he'll come down and pick them up, we would appreciate it. I think the amount is $10 per day. Okay. And I think we're now ready to go.
Okay. All right, then the next order of business is Dr. Jarrell Booker. He will lead us in a discussion of guiding principles for the committee.
Thank you. Good morning. Can y'all hear me okay? I talk loud and it seems very loud. My name is Jarrell Booker. For the record, I'm the Deputy Assistant Commissioner here at the Coordinating Board for College Readiness. This is also my first time before this committee, so thank you for having me. Being it's my first time, it's interesting that the news I'm bringing is news of change. I thought I could take a couple of months getting acclimated and understanding. I know Applied Texas is a wonderful system. I'm more familiar with the counselor suite side of things. I deal with that over the last few years in my role. But part of this discussion today is to talk about how recent legislation, agency reorganization, and a programmatic review of Applied Texas directly affects this committee and the work that this committee is going to be doing in the future. I think many of you have received information prior to this meeting from Jane that kind of talked about negotiated rulemaking. Hopefully you had an opportunity to read over that during the holidays. But what I want to bring up is two items that kind of direct my discussion with you today. One is Senate Bill 215, which is now kind of codified in Texas Education Code 61.0331, and it's also spelled out in rules by the Texas Administrative Code 1.14, and also the kind of uniform admissions part of the statute, Texas Education Code 51.762, which should have been, all of that should have been part of your materials that are on your desk.
Jarrell, may I
Sure.
point them where to find them? In one of the sets of materials that you have that has a paper clip on it, the top piece is the statute that created the Common App form, and the next to the last page is an excerpt from Senate Bill 215 that has to do with the negotiated rulemaking requirement for Applied Texas. Thank you.
So as you flip through that, Senate Bill 215 from the 83rd Legislature basically is the Coordinating Board's sunset legislation. As you're all very familiar with what sunset legislation does. It continues our agency for another 12 years, but it also streamlined a lot of our agency core functions. The point I want to really bring to your attention is that it requires us to do negotiated rulemaking in the development of policies, procedures, and rules relating to a number of items, but specifically as it relates to you all, the common admissions application, uniform admission policy, and graduate and professional admissions. For our purposes today, we're definitely talking about the common admission application. Later, after I finish speaking, Dr. Smith next to me will actually get into the specifics of negotiated rulemaking. She's the point person for our agency for negotiated rulemaking. But in terms of my remarks, what this negotiated rulemaking has done through 215 is said, we do not want this particular advisory committee to make these sort of decisions. They want a negotiated rulemaking committee to make certain type of decisions. Okay? Now, where that comes from, I don't know, but it's been placed upon us, and it's my job to bring it to everyone's attention. The way this committee has actually been doing business is now going to have to change based off of these rules. Dr. Smith will explain negotiated rulemaking and explain how that relates to you, whether you serve on that committee or not. She'll get into all of that. I imagine a lot of you will, based off of what your presidents want to do, but there is going to be a difference. Also, with that difference comes a closer look at Education Code 51762, which is dealing directly with this common application. The statute is laid out a number of different ways, but if you look at it, dating back to, I guess, 1997, I guess it's been around, this committee's been around that long. It's really specific at the coordinating board must get advice from members such as you all to go develop rules around this Applied Texas application. But since 1997, we've gone beyond some of the things the statute was built to do. My guess is going beyond what the statute was built to do has caused the legislature to come back and put this negotiated rulemaking in place. That's my guess. What we're going to do moving forward based off of these two statutes is we're going to have to redesign this committee. and redesign based through rules. And I know a couple of you, one sitting next to me, a gentleman in the back, are brand new. So your first day is a redesign? Yes, the first day is going to be a redesign. The redesign is going to not just deal with membership, because the membership is still going to be universities and community colleges and technical colleges and so forth, but your role, the amount of meetings you have, is going to change. The meetings will probably be as needed. The role will be specifically as recommendations to the coordinating board, where the coordinating board will actually deal with the University of Texas and implementing some of those recommendations. Now, here's the issue. We at the coordinating board cannot make changes to the app and do things without your input. We don't know. You're doing it every day. You're the end user. You're the ones dealing with the students. So the amount of stakeholder input and recommendations that you give us are necessary for us to do the job. So that can't change. But how we do it, is it 4 meetings, 5 meetings, 2 meetings, online, face-to-face, that is going to change. Anything that deals with, and I'm looking at my notes just so I'm clear, development of policy, procedures, and rules as it relates to the Common Admission app will go to this new negotiated rulemaking committee, which has its own set of guidelines and timelines and schedule. And if any of you have been a part of that, you might be familiar with what that takes. And like I said, Dr. Smith will deal with that. The current rules for this committee will be amended to reflect this kind of new reality based off of the statute. A restructured advisory board for the Common App will still be utilized. I'm going to be clear. We will still have something utilized, but it will be as an as-need basis. And obviously there's changes that happen yearly, or language changes or questions. Those are things we're still going to need input on and some recommendations on to move forward with. What we will do is right now it seems we will use some sort of advisory committee for technical changes and maintenance of the system. Obviously, the counselor suite and things that are back engine, things for you all that you need for your own processes will still have to take place regardless. So we're going to still take that input to be able to speak to the University of Texas and make those changes. After Dr. Smith speaks, Jane Caldwell will actually talk about future operations and future procedures as we have it drafted now. My guess is we'll make some more tweaks and have to keep all of you informed as we make these sort of changes. But what I want to be clear on today, and I want to leave some time for questions, is the way we've done business is now is changing. And I think it probably should have changed back in August when the bill actually first went in, but as the agency was reorging, one of your great leaders, Jose, has left. There was a lot of changing within, and we wanted to make sure the work that you had started still gets in and gets done timely for the next application cycle. But moving forward, we will have to redesign, redo rules, and a lot of that will go to that negotiated rulemaking. That said, that kind of concludes my comments or my remarks, but I definitely want to do 2 things today. 1, be able to answer some questions now. 2, let it sink in, and then I will be around all day today and all day tomorrow. So if you want to pull me to the side and the back, please step and speak to me, and I'd love to speak to you directly if you need to ask specific questions, or as things bubble and you talk amongst yourselves and more questions arise, I want to be available to answer those questions as well. Thank you. Any questions? I'll let it sink in, then I'll walk to the back, I'll sit in the back. I'm going to turn over to Dr. Smith to actually tell you about the negotiated rulemaking process.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for being on this committee, for serving on this Applied Texas Advisory Committee. I'm Mary Smith. I'm the Coordinating Board's designated ADR coordinator. And I'm here actually just to provide you some basic information about negotiated rulemaking so that you know what to expect with respect to negotiated rulemaking. Let's see, I'm sorry. Let's see, I just messed this up already. Okay. As Jarrell just informed you, our sunset bill, Senate Bill 2215, requires the coordinating board to engage in negotiated rulemaking in accordance with the Negotiated Rulemaking Act. Specifically, that's Texas Government Code 2008. And that's whenever the coordinating board adopts policies, procedures, or rules related to certain matters. Those matters are there's a list specifically in the law about those things. And the list includes the Common admission policy and the uniform admission policy. But I don't want you to think that this has been totally singled out, because we've got the list that includes the admission policy regarding the common admission application, the uniform admission policy, and the graduate and professional admissions that Jarrell just mentioned. But we also have transfer of credit, allocation or distribution of funds, including financial aid, reevaluation of data requests, compliance monitoring, and capital project standards. So it's not only focused on this committee, and I want you to be sure to be aware of that. One of the primary themes of our Sunset Commission's recommendations was essentially to strengthen stakeholder input. And the legislature felt that negotiated rulemaking is one tool that we can use to ensure maximum stakeholder input. Historically, as you know, we've used advisory committees like yours to develop rules and recommend changes. But the Sunset Commission found that we really had too many advisory committees, and that not all the committees provided information directly to the coordinating board. So our Sunset Bill, Senate Bill 215, requires that all advisory committees report their recommendations directly to the coordinating board. So what is negotiated rulemaking? Fundamentally, it's a consensus-based process that uses interest-based negotiation. Representatives from a governmental agency and the affected interest groups negotiate the terms of a proposed administrative rule, policy, or procedure. You want to think about it in terms of essentially there's positional bargaining, like when you go to bargain for a car. You bargain for a car, you've got a negotiating range. The salesperson wants to sell you a car for the maximum that they can get, and you want to purchase that car for the minimum that you can buy that car for. So you've got positional bargaining. You kind of back and forth, and there's like an overlap of bargaining. And if there's an overlap, you can generally negotiate a positional bargain. This is different. A position is essentially what you say you want or must have. I want the car for this really small price. An interest is why you want the car for that particular price. And that's the idea of negotiated rulemaking. It's interest-based. The idea is to get beyond the position and try to figure out what the interest is, what the objective or need is of the party, and that's what you use to help integrate and collaborate with your colleagues who might have slightly different interests. So the idea is that the process helps governmental agencies develop proposed policies or procedures or rules in collaboration with the stakeholders that rule, policy, or procedure will actually affect. And so that text is negotiated by those individuals. With a consensus decision-making, participants make decisions by agreement rather than by majority vote. In the process, the committee members actually define consensus for themselves and include their definition of consensus in the ground rules. The committee has reached consensus only if the agreement concurs with the definition of consensus that was unanimously agreed to by the parties. So displayed right there is just an example definition of consensus, which I won't read to you, because essentially what happens is that the negotiated rulemaking committee sees something that looks like this and then unanimously agrees to either accept that definition or modify it for the work that they're doing. Now, most definitions, like this one, imply agreement, acceptance, and acknowledgement that the things can move forward and that people support the decision, or at least can live with it, or at least are willing to accept it. So in other words, when consensus is reached, all the negotiated rulemaking members concur in the decision because their major interests have been taken into consideration and addressed in what they think is a satisfactory manner. The members might differ in their acceptance of individual terms within the text, but all members can support the final agreement given the trade-offs and the current circumstances. Given the mixture of issues and the mixture of values, there are likely to be levels of enthusiasm for the final agreement. And there will be some levels of differential support for different sections. But the idea is that on balance, those people agree that this is the rule that they want to move forward, or the procedure or the policy. Now, as Jarell has already said, at the Coordinating Board's October 2013 meeting, and after a 30-day comment period within the Texas Register, as is our standard, and by law, the Coordinating Board adopted new rules that concern negotiated rulemaking, and you have these in your packet. I won't go into all the details. You're welcome to read them in detail. Essentially, the rules outline the definitions, the requirements for, and the key responsibilities of the individuals who are involved in the process of negotiated rulemaking. The procedure essentially begins with the Commissioner's publication in the Texas Register of a notice of intent to establish a negotiated rulemaking committee to prepare the proposed rule, procedure, or policy. There's absolute specifics that need to be in that notice of intent. And among them are a description of the subject and the scope of the rule that's going to be developed, and a list of the individuals that the ADR coordinator, through the commission, as the ADR coordinator, I act on behalf of the commissioner. And that I would propose to appoint certain members to that negotiated rulemaking committee. And then that group goes out for comment. That list of folks that we had anticipated and invited to participate are actually part of that intent, to the notice of intent. And those comments can include also the individuals that we've proposed to be on the committee. And then finally what happens is that is chosen, that committee membership is chosen, which I'll go over in a minute. The commissioner has appointed me as the Alternative Dispute Resolution Coordinator. My duties include considering the comments and the nominations received and appointing the members to the Negotiated Rulemaking Committee. And as the ADR coordinator, I need to actually consider adequate and balanced representation, the expertise of the folks that are proposed to be on the committee, and I need to be able to keep the size manageable, because obviously we could include every institution, but it would be essentially an unmanageable committee, essentially like what you're here to represent your institutions and the sector that you're representing. I won't go into all the other little details that I have to do, but essentially what the other big responsibility that I have with respect to negotiated rulemaking is to appoint a facilitator to the committee when the negotiated rulemaking committee meets. The facilitator essentially serves as a neutral third party, and that individual uses alternative dispute resolution skills to help the members reach consensus on all the issues involved in the proposed rule, the procedure, or the policy. Essentially what happens is that the facilitator tries to drum out the interests from the positions that the members come with to the meeting. So we initially thought about hiring outside mediators, but it's very expensive to do that. So what happened was that the coordinating board has trained certain staff members within the agency to act as facilitators for the negotiated rulemaking committees when they meet. The duties generally fall into two related categories: facilitation, helping people speak, see somebody that's actually needing to speak, kind of wants to, a little hesitant, and the facilitator needs to drum that person out using body language, seeing what they might want to say. And then the other half is essentially mediating, and that helps using mediation techniques to drum out those interests, right? The facilitator then leaves the coordinating board an opportunity to actually have a member also on the committee. But the facilitator, him or herself, cannot have any interest in the negotiation. So essentially, when I was a facilitator, I was assigned to facilitate the negotiated rulemaking for things that I was so totally not involved in the agency. So for example, I'm not involved in financial aid at all. So I would be assigned to be the facilitator for the negotiated rulemaking committees considering the allocation distribution of monies for particular financial aid pack. I have no vested interest. I don't work with the folks at all that do that. So that would be who I would choose, as now I'm now the ADR coordinator now that Linda Battles is the deputy commissioner. So essentially what I would do is to choose one of our folks that is not involved in Apply Texas or the application process to facilitate the negotiated rulemaking committee that would be dealing with things that would be policies, procedures, or rules having to do with the common application. The final thing about the negotiated rulemaking facilitator is that facilitator serves at the will of the committee. So although I would put forth the facilitator's name and introduce him or her, the committee itself would be able to decide whether or not this individual is somebody that they really want to facilitate their work. And that facilitator cannot compel or coerce the members to reach a consensus. Now, here's the membership. Essentially, the negotiated rulemaking committee members serve in a representative role on behalf of all the stakeholders who share mutual interests in the proposed rule, policy, or procedure. They identify the issues that need to be negotiated, they review information, and they commit to negotiating in good faith. And they negotiate the text or the outline of the proposed rule, and they reach consensus, or not. And then finally, they provide a report to the coordinating board, which will essentially provide the agency with the information that they need to actually write the rule. This is the big difference between consultation and consensus processes. Once the agency receives the report from the negotiated rulemaking committee, be it a consensus decision or not, if the consensus was reached on the draft text, then the agency staff will recommend to top agency decision makers that the committee's agreed upon rule be published in the Texas Register as the agency's proposed rule. The most significant differences between consultation and consensus processes are how decisions are made and what happens to the product of the decision. In consultation, the agency receives input, and then the staff members formulate the proposed decision. In the consensus process, the agency puts the product of the negotiation out for the official review in the Texas Register as if it were the final rule or the final decision. The agency that convenes the negotiated rulemaking committee does still retain the final decision-making authority. But again, the agency puts the negotiated rulemaking committee's consensus reached policy, procedure, or rule out as the final decision for official review during the specified 30-day comment period. Again, the agency is always legally responsible for the rulemaking. But once that has happened, then the agency essentially re-enters traditional rulemaking processes. So essentially what happens is that the negotiated rulemaking committee's suggested language goes out for the 30 days, we get the comments, and then those comments, instead of going directly to the board, our board, they go to the negotiated rulemaking committee again. And then that negotiated rulemaking committee decides again whether or not they want to accept or not the comments that have been suggested to enhance what they believed at the time they ended their final rule is appropriate. And we can do that through conference call, frankly, because it's usually easier to do it. But we have to, again, have a consensus based on the definition that that committee agreed to when they first started working. There are advantages to the negotiated rulemaking process. It works really well when one wants to find an integrative solution that will satisfy as many parties as possible. And it also actively affirms the importance of the relationship and the content goals, and it builds a team and partnership approach to rulemaking and policy making. You probably don't have an ongoing relationship with that car dealer that you were negotiating a car on. Probably not. You might use their service center, but that individual person that you were haggling with about your car, you probably won't see him or her a lot. We see you a lot. We are a coordinating board, and so we want to maintain a good relationship with the individual institutions that we are required to work with under the law and under our coordinating board rules. So these kinds of issues are perfect for negotiated rulemaking. Disadvantages. If the investment in the relationship is low, like it would be for a car dealer, the time it takes to negotiate a rule by consensus is a lot of times not worth the trouble, because you're never going to see that person again anyway, so it really doesn't matter if you've hurt their feelings particularly. But when we're having an ongoing relationship years and years out, it's a good idea to get as much input first and then put that idea out for comment. The only other issue that's really a disadvantage is that one person can frustrate the intentions of multiple collaborators, which is why the negotiated rulemaking committee members need to agree to negotiate in good faith. The idea is to come and work with your colleagues, hear what they have to say, and try to see it from their perspective. Dual perspective taking, which is essentially a skill of the facilitator to help the individuals on the committee to see what the other people's perspectives could be and why their interests might be what they are. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'm going to turn it over when Jane is ready to the actual timeline to show you what the process essentially looks like when you incorporate the requests for nominations and the comment periods, all that. It does take longer, but in the long run, of course, I'm totally biased because I really believe in the process, but it does take longer, but in my opinion, it is well worth the effort.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary. I guess I'm supposed to kind of take the theory and say where this goes from here. And one of the main things that I want to stress as I go forward with my few comments is that we're figuring this out as we go along. It's not like the coordinating board or Jarrell and I and Mary have the final answers. As you can imagine, one of the trickiest things about moving into a negotiated rulemaking environment is identifying the scope of the assignment to that committee. For instance, it doesn't make much sense to have them deciding the wording of a line in a particular application. You know, there is a lot of important decisions. There are a lot of important decisions made by this committee that justify the continuation of an advisory committee of this sort, though perhaps not in the same mode as it has been in the past. You are the ones with the subject matter knowledge. I have had 2.5 months to absorb as much as I can, and I think I'm almost out of the starting blocks at most. So your knowledge, your understanding of how this process works, there is no desire to disrupt the flow of the cycle, the ability of students to apply for admission and so forth. But we're going to have some interesting challenges in determining whether certain issues that have been raised either by this group or by a colleague in the field who brought it to a member of this group or just directly by the coordinating board, whether it falls into the scope of what's written in Senate Bill 215, which is a policy, procedure, or rule dealing with admission policy. Not the wording of an application, but admission policy. That is the distinction that we're challenged to identify as we work in the future with these two entities. I've had the experience of working with a number of different negotiated rulemaking committees that dealt with the allocation of funds for financial aid. And you can imagine getting consensus on money is not an easy thing to do. In most of those cases, it was quite successful, and it's fascinating to watch as the consensus grows and the common view is developed. We don't have the answers of quite how this is going to fit, but one of the things that we've got to be very sensitive to is the amount of time it takes to get a negotiated rulemaking committee convened, have it meet, have it reach its conclusions, have those conclusions posted in the register for 30 days, have it go to our board for adoption, and so forth. Because one of the few things that I think I understand about the committee is that Tim and his group need to know by January pretty much what's going to be changed for the following cycle. And so we played with, we spent a lot of time trying to figure out the timeline of if we start at that end date and work backwards, where do we need to start the convening process of the negotiated rulemaking? And as a neophyte optimist, rosy Pollyanna, I thought, oh, if we start in September, we should be able to do this. And everyone said, oh, yeah. And the problem is that I was assuming the committee met and reached consensus on the first day, maybe had just the one meeting and they reached consensus of what was going to happen, as opposed to having multiple meetings that are very likely to happen. I also assume that when it's posted, you're not going to have a lot of comments coming back, and obviously it's very possible that that will happen. Long story short, when we're talking about getting the negotiated rulemaking process started, we're probably talking about convening that committee in June, to leave plenty of time for all of the negotiations to take place, for there to be multiple meetings if necessary, because even after they get their conclusions posted in the register, it then has to go to the board, has to be adopted, then it has to go into effect 20 days later. So even getting conclusion, we're not finished yet. We still have a major part of the process going. So we are going to be working between now and June or so to decide what perhaps should go to a negotiated committee, whether we need to convene a committee. Frankly, I'm fairly certain there will be a committee convened to look at some of the rule issues for the Apply Texas process. And in the meantime, though, what you have been doing in the past and what we ask you to do today and tomorrow continues to be vitally important to keeping this system going. By tomorrow afternoon, when we adjourn, hopefully we'll have the priorities for the work to be done. The only thing that's going to change is that instead of taking your list and just giving it to Tim and say, go and do, there will be some internal decisions by the coordinating board as to is there anything that we need to add and whether there are resources to allow us to do all the stuff that the committee had asked for and this other thing. For instance, there's an issue about reporting to our board. And we could perhaps want to include in our priority list the generation of annual reports on the utilization of each type of application by each institution. That's the kind of statistic to justify this process that we can show to the public and to our board as to the success of what this is all about. So those kinds of things can happen. But the first step is to do what we were planning to do anyway, which is to come together, generate that consensus list of what has priority according to this group of knowledgeable people. And then we start taking this a step at a time as we go forward. Our guesstimate was that we would have a meeting of this group in April or May, and then one, say, in October. Because once the May meeting would be the last opportunity to get input before the negotiated rulemaking committee gets started. So that would be an opportunity to get some input from you about some possible issues. But it's also just keeping the wheel going. You typically had a second meeting in the spring. So that if Tim had some issues from the priority list that weren't working, you would give them some additional feedback. In all likelihood, we at the coordinating board will try to handle that. But if we can't address that, then we may need to call on you in an ad hoc meeting or a conference call or whatever. We're not trying to leave you out of the process, but we're trying to indicate and show that this is now a coordinating board process with your good input and to help us do it right. Okay? Anything else that you think I need to say?
A couple things. It's more than a coordinating board process. It's actually a negotiated rule process. Believe me, I like input, but having to ask 30 and 40 people to do something every 2 months is difficult to do, but it's helpful to get the input from stakeholders to actually make good decisions. We can't live in a vacuum, and like I said earlier, y'all the end users and talk to the students all the time, as well as the K-12 folks. So what we're hoping for is in this transition, I'm talking the next 12 months is going to be new. It's going to be difficult, but we're going to learn from it. I'm excited to see who gets chosen for the negotiated rulemaking committee. I hope you all go speak to your institutions when these things happen. You're still going to be a part of it because I've heard your input and it's helpful. But also know it's going to take us some time and a challenge to kind of lay out how it's going to go, what sort of input we can do internally, what sort of maintenance and technical issues we can decide, and what actually needs to go to negotiated rulemaking. That'll be the challenge. And for the new members, I know, like I said, there are a couple new members. Welcome, if we haven't welcomed you. But you're walking into a new day and age of how we do things, and hopefully this application, which I think is the gem in the United States, can continue to be such a shining light and also an example of how other states should do business here in the country. Y'all have any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Are you saying that, like the question of changing, the verbiage in a sentence on the Apply Texas app, is that something that has to go to negotiated rulemaking, or only a policy and procedure? Okay, and can you give me an example of what would be a policy and procedure that this group may come across?
That's the magic question. So, for example, sometimes when you're making changes in the application, there could be decisions. As people go through the applications, they're making decisions, and I guess the system is thinking it through based off of what you ask. And clearly, some of those issues or some of the things that the decisions make might teeter on changing the way an institution makes their own decision. The other point I want to make out, when that might not be as good as discussion as, we have transfer apps. Let me go back. We, by law, said it should have maybe 2 applications at most, right? You should have a 4-year app for freshmen, and then it started off saying for transfer. How many apps do we have now? 6, 7? The nursing app was new, 7 apps. So what's happened is maybe 7, 9 apps. So it went from 1 common to 9 uncommon. Okay, and what's happened is that's become an admission. Schools are feeling they have to use this app, have to use that app, and that by itself is something that they're looking to say, hey, maybe we need a negotiated rulemaking to deal with. In a new app, we're talking about putting FAFSA information in apps and making these. I'm not making the choice on what it is, but that becomes policies for certain schools that they have to use things that they may not want to use, or more, be quite clear, paying fees that may not even apply to them. So that started to lend itself to, hey, we need to actually have this negotiated rulemaking process to be able to make these sort of decisions. And it won't be the coordinating board on this, it'll be the rulemaking committee. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to make a comment that the most important user in this process is the student, first and foremost. And I know that institutions use it, but this committee has served to look at what's best for the student in completing it, because sometimes students are not guided through the process, and a lot of them are, at least in my district and in a lot of areas in the state, are first generation. No one to guide them. So everything that is in this application must be clear, transparent, and user-friendly. And I've been here 14 years. Maybe it's my 15th year. I don't know. I've lost count. But anyways, and so I have been grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak on behalf of the students that I serve, for I think it's reflective of all of us. We serve them in different ways. But again, going back to the student is the first and foremost user.
Absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly.
I have a question. So in choosing the new members for this new committee, you mentioned, and I was a little unclear about how you'd go about doing that, but it would be your responsibility to select members based on expertise, or would it be the president's recommendations or nominations that would go to you, that you would vet out, or how will this new committee be formed in terms of membership?
Specifically, what will happen is that the commissioner will put a notice of intent in the Texas Register soliciting, I'm sorry, I see what you're saying. The first thing that will happen is that the convener who is another individual here at the coordinating board who is assigned to help the ADR coordinator, specifically her name is Lori Frederick. She will put out an email requesting nominations. And then the nominations will come in, and then essentially what I'll be doing, I was working with her and with Jarrell and with Jane to to construct a committee based on expertise, and one that has that we anticipate will be able to vocalize the interest for that particular group. So once that happens and we get the nominations, then we put that notice of intent with those names, and then the comment period begins. So essentially what will happen is that the nominations will come in. I can see why you're questioning that. The nominations will come in from the president's office, or from the individuals to whom the president sends the email for recommendations for nominations to the committee. So once that process begins, then I would encourage you to talk to your president or to your chief instructional officer, whoever you normally report to, say that you're interested in serving as a negotiated rulemaking committee member. And we anticipate that a number of you will be on the negotiated rulemaking committee group.
I have a question. It's a process question. So the way I understand it is, as we go through today and we make recommendations about the changes in the application, then those will be looked at, and any that appear to be changes in policy would go to a rulemaking committee. So does one rulemaking committee look at all of the issues, or is there a rulemaking committee for each different policy?
It'll all depend. Actually, technically the way it goes is that it would be anything that would have to do with admission policy, so that the committee could conceivably think about other things too.
It could be 2 or 3 issues related to admissions.
Correct.
And then that committee, once it deals with that, it's just a temporary committee?
Yes.
And then next year, when this committee meets and goes through issues, it goes through that same cycle again?
Yes, exactly.
So the rulemaking committee is always the temporary committee for that specific
Right. Essentially, if you
issue.
really get into the nitty-gritty, the committee is essentially no longer exists once the whole process has run itself out
for that particular.
They get a specific charge on what they will be negotiating. So it could be more than one issue, but like, for example, the allocation methodologies that I've been involved in the past, there's specifics, exactly what section of the board rules that they would be addressing. This is a little bit different in that it's, like Jarrell said, it's anything that you would be dealing with. It wouldn't necessarily only be a coordinating board rule. It'll be a policy or procedure too. So that's what where we're all kind of using. We're going to have to try to figure out which things that you will be working on would fit the definition of a policy, procedure, or a rule.
But so basically, this committee stays in general as is, or the way it's operated, and the rulemaking committee comes in when there's recommendations for issues that would be changes in policy.
In part, this committee still going to have to be a rule change for this committee also.
Okay.
The amount of meetings, how often. We talked about guiding principles, as you well know, just trying to maintain that scope. I think Pilar was very clear. One of the guiding principles is it's student-centered and things of that sort. So it will be restructured as it will not be the way it currently is. 4 or 5 meetings, the different subcommittees. That's going to change, but there will be some sort of stakeholder, some sort of input from whether it's you all or people in your role to us to be able to do the technical maintenance and other things that don't fall in the negotiated rulemaking's purview.
If I may say, make one statement about the list and the scope and who does what. We've looked at the list of items that Tim provided, and in fact, they came from your November 10 meeting notes. And so we looked through those, and at least I can only speak for myself. Going through it the first time, I didn't find anything that I would call administrative policy. Now, that I still need to get my head, we're talking about a fine line that hasn't been determined yet. So there was one thing in Tim's additional list of things that have been brought forward that struck me as maybe definitely being, I'm articulate this morning, being a policy decision, and that was the one that dealt with the online registration, the online high school and residency. That's not, in my opinion, within the scope of this committee. It is a policy about residency, and it may be something that requires either statute or definitely something broader approach. So that's the kind of stuff that we're going to have to be on the lookout for, because we think if that kind of thing doesn't go to a negotiated rulemaking committee, we could get a lot of flack. But as to where we draw that line as to what goes, we're on that learning curve with you.
So, and just for Jane to pick it back, we're not making these decisions in isolation. We're bringing in legal counsel to make these decisions, and we're going to err on the negotiated rulemaking side by the fact that it was in our sunset bill. It's clear they don't want two competing interests, and we don't want to make that sort of to be an issue. But we do take this very seriously, and like I said, some stuff we do not want to take 9 months if we're just changing something that needs to happen that's technical or maintenance related.
I have a question. I didn't see anywhere in the provisions about the term of the members. Are we aware?
Of the negotiated rulemaking committee? Mm-hmm. Actually, it will, once say, for example, the board actually adopts it, okay, then we would send an email to the negotiated rulemaking committee saying thank you so much for your service. And see, once that's done, then that committee is done. Once they fulfill their charge. So it depends, because if the negotiated rulemaking committee say they meet and they agree, consensus, they do all that, and they can do it in one meeting. If it's very clear, the negotiated rulemaking committee oftentimes will only need one meeting, and then they will achieve consensus. There have been negotiated rulemaking committees that are not able to reach consensus in one meeting. The most difficult one we've had 4 meetings. So depending on the controversy of the issues involved. So I can't really tell you exactly when it would end, but it essentially ends once they've completed their work or they have agreed to disband because they are not able to reach consensus.
So at least for the ones that we've had, none of them went for longer than a year.
Correct. In fact, the longest one was from February to July, when they decided that their interests were so diametrically opposed that they could not reach consensus. And once that happens, then what happens is that the board, our board, will consider what they've almost got consensus with, say for example, and then they work with staff, again, in the same way that would normally be utilized because the committee was not able to reach consensus. But so far, we've had pretty good track record. We've only had one committee that wasn't able to reach consensus. Does that answer your question?
It does, but then it brings up another one. So every year, if Apply Texas, this committee finds they come up with something that may affect the policy, rule, or process. Mm-hmm. This committee is created every year?
The negotiated rulemaking committee.
A new one.
A new one.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It basically is constituted just to deal with the specific charge of, like for example, how the allocation process is distributed amongst the community colleges for financial aid. So once that language is written, and then the board, it goes through the whole process of the comment period, the board, and the adoption by the board. Then that's when the committee is done.
Okay. But is the committee called the Apply Texas Negotiated Rulemaking Committee if they're dealing with financial aid issues?
No. I'm just using that as an example.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, because truthfully, we have not constituted a negotiated rulemaking committee about the admission policy at this point. And so I'm only referring to those that I've done in the past, which has had to do with financial aid.
But my understanding is that this committee will no longer exist. It will turn into this Apply Texas negotiation?
Well, no. Actually, that's going to be a question for Jarrell.
Okay.
So there's 2 things moving. This committee will turn into an as-needed basis to recommend, give concerns, technical maintenance to the coordinating board. We will come up with a new schedule of how that will happen and membership. But it, could be broader, it could be different, but we will do that. So that will be where the Apply Texas recommendations, stakeholder, that will will take place. That will be yearly. Okay? I say as needed because I think we're going to need it yearly. We're going to need some sort of input. There's changes, different application timelines. Then, and similar to her question, but let's say some concerns or comments or recommendations come to us that this feels like an admission policy or rule or procedure. All of that, we will take that to a negotiated rulemaking committee. So that will meet, come up with answers, disband.
Okay.
Right? We're always going to be in constant contact with you all to get information just generally to maintain the system and keep Applied Texas going. But this negotiated rulemaking seems like they'll be making that level of decision making whenever it comes up. We're hoping we can do that every May, June. That way it can get into the proper timeline that Tim needs. That's why we say it that way. But let's say they meet in June, they come up with something in July, and it's done. They're done. This group might meet with us again in October and find a whole bunch of other issues. Some of them really easy. Coordinating board can talk. We meet with Tim, gets put in, no problem. Something that's an admission policy procedure rule, which is what Michelle was talking about, is the difficult thing to figure out. That'll go to another negotiated rulemaking. We'll start it all over again, send it out, have people join, and then they'll meet again to come up with that sort of answer.
As I understand it, we could have years when there was no need for a negotiated rulemaking committee, but it's hard to perceive of a year when we don't need the kind of input that we get from this committee. So in whatever form that continues, we're going to need your feedback on a regular basis to maintain this system that is working so well. And it's the big league policy decision thingies that have to go, thingies, that's a technical term, that need to go to the negotiating rulemaking committee.
So if we meet once a year, just out of example, how does that affect the Applied Texas Conference and things that are ongoing each year?
Well, I was going to suggest, we're staring at the sample timeline. I would suggest that either the Apply Texas be moved up annually, or we wait to convene after the Apply Texas conference.
Do you have months, or when you say moved up, what are you thinking about?
Well, looking at this, it's usually July?
June.
Yeah. So we would.
Okay, this schedule that's here is strictly for the negotiated rulemaking committee. It is not for the Apply Texas.
Correct, but I mean, we would want to do that in order. We would want to have the Apply Texas first, this advisory meeting, and then.
Yeah, and so again, our tentative schedule was to have this group meet in April, May, and then again in October. And those dates definitely can be changed. That was just our throw the dart at the wall and figure out how we do this. So we're very open to suggestions of the timeline for getting feedback from this group.
Because wouldn't the stuff have to go to the negotiating people, the negotiating board, prior to the actual meeting and the implementation of the updates for Apply Texas?
No, the basic updates are you decide, recommend to the coordinating board. We work with Tim and his company to get that done. It's when something pops out of that flow of keeping this thing going and keeping it right that it becomes a policy decision that even the question of having a negotiated rulemaking committee comes up. And so we've got this one going, and this one comes up. The negotiated rulemaking comes up on a also as need basis to address the policy decisions regarding admissions.
But it seemed like that what was being said was that the meetings of this group would not continue as they have. And it seems like we need to continue to meet, like what you're saying, on a fairly routine basis so that we continue to make improvements to the application, but with the awareness that if we hit on something that is a policy or procedure, that then may require that we invoke this negotiated rulemaking.
If I may, the information you're talking about, that sort of knowledge and input is needed. How it's done is not clear.
Okay.
We have not decided. So you just raised a couple points about the conference. The conference is not factored in to the legislators because they're looking at the statute need, and to be quite honest, extra things like the conference and other stuff is what caused them to do this. You all are in this world every day. This is what you do. This is, kind of what you're talking about, student-centered. This is where we are. And we have grown and created stuff that wasn't the intent of the legislation. It was not the intent of the legislators. Whether there's a need or not saying there isn't. Obviously, it has been. There's been things that have come out that's been good, that's come out of the conference, that's come out of these meetings, that comes out of the different stakeholder engagement meetings you've had locally and regionally that other people don't even know is even happening. But that was not their original intent. So what's happened is you have this new thing that's on top to rein that back in. Let me be quite clear. That was their goal. Okay?
I have a question about that.
Sure.
Isn't the conference managed by TACRO?
It is.
Okay, and so it's an informational meeting. How is that related to the coordinating board?
The issue with the coordinating board is not whether the TACRO conference actually happens. The issue is whether we have a specific meeting for Applied Texas for this committee around that conference. Everything I've heard about the conferences is wonderful, right? I mean,
well, there are several conferences. There's a state TACRO conference, and then there's a summer meeting sponsored by TACRO that is Apply Texas specific, and it's really to educate, really mostly to educate users for how to use the Apply Texas app as an administrator.
Right.
So.
No, the issue is not whether we have that conference. That's not for us to do. The issue is whether we have set meetings through Apply Texas, through this group, in terms of, and for that. See what I'm saying? They're separate.
In our district, we have 7 early college high schools. We have 8th grade counselors doing Applied Texas that I have to in-service, and I have to show how to use, because that's not the world they usually live in.
Right.
And that's where we're going with all the dual enrollment, that's where we're going. And I want to use a particular issue that came up this year. For example, students had to use a social security number to get past the profile. And in our district, I can tell you there are 307 students that did not declare a social security, so they're not DECA or whatever. So we believe most of them, are students that would not have a social security because they're undocumented, have lived there all their lives or whatever, but are not residents or U.S. citizens. And so I actually had to go through it and work with the college advisors, our Advice Texas, our AmeriCorps mentors, our transitional college counselors we have each campus, to find a way. And we actually had to put that the student residence or permanent residence was Mexico before we could move past that. And then it was removed and then became optional. But it was a situation that needed to be addressed, and it really wasn't negotiating, but it was something that was happening, and I'm sure it wasn't just happening at BISD, or students were making up numbers because they didn't want to put their social security number, and so there were issues that needed to be addressed, and so there's that kind of fine line. How do you, if this doesn't exist and it's just negotiating, or I don't know. I just thought I'd bring that up.
Janice, you bring up a great point, and I know this was all before my time, but I know that the reasons that we had asked for the Social Security numbers, that change was made, but by consensus in this group, for the best of all of our students, it was decided, again before I was here, hey, we're not going to do that because that puts up barriers and eliminates, but we did it timely, I believe, and we were able to do that without going through negotiated rulemaking.
I think part of it we're also looking at, again, if you've got to remember the distinction between the policy decisions and the functional aspect of what we're doing. Negotiated rulemaking will never be a quick fix to anything. That's not in its vocabulary. But we'll have issues that come up that need quick fixes, and then if there's an underlying policy, then we go back to the negotiating rulemaking committee to figure a long-term kind of accommodation for it. But we've got to keep that quick fix ability because the world keeps changing more rapidly than we can. But I recently completed one of the applications, and I found things in there that I couldn't answer, and there was no option for NA, that kind of thing. And as a newbie to this thing, I would love to go in and say, let's spend the next year just cleaning all that stuff up. Let's go through it and make sure that the questions have usable answers, that we're not asking questions that we don't need to ask, and that kind of stuff. Again, this may make you all want to pull your hair out and throw it at me, but as a newbie, that was my initial reaction to it, is, oh my gosh, this is overwhelming. And so it's almost exciting to think this might be a chance to step back and relook at what we've done and figure out the best way to serve the students and make it as simple as possible for the students while meeting the absolute needs of the institutions. And I'm not yet at that position where I can split those two out. I would imagine there are questions in those forms that help the institution more than they help the student. And the question is, where do we go from here with those questions? If you have to collect the data, does it have to be collected on the admission application? So those are the kinds of, it's not an admission policy decision, it is a application form policy decision that I would consider appropriate for this committee, at least based on our current world, and that may, as the discussion goes forward, that might not be considered a ATAC policy discussion, but a negotiated rule policy discussion. So, we don't know the answers yet either. But these are things that are coming up as we look at it, and opportunities that we think we see to make this thing maybe even better than it is, and it's awfully good right now.
I have a question from a colleague who's watching this today, and they want to make sure that negotiated rulemaking, the committee would include people specific to maybe that application type or that policy type. For example, I would hate to go in and serve on the 2-year application committee because I'm a university and I do not serve that part, or my institution is not using the scholarship application, so I wouldn't want to be part of that because users really make those decisions and need to make those decisions. And so as we made negotiated rulemaking, would we be looking among 4-year institutions when we're using the 4-year app, or people specific to scholarship, or how would that work?
Essentially what we do is we encourage institutions to nominate an individual with expertise or experience in the area that they are going to be negotiating, because of course that's the only way that they would be able to share with everyone on the committee the interests that they are bringing forward to the table. So that's the idea. When you get a group together for negotiated rulemaking, you want to have, obviously regional representation, but you also really want to have folks that are involved day to day in the work of the issue that's being negotiated, so that they can bring forward the interests and help everybody to understand those interests. So that'll be part of it but in answer to your question, definitely we wouldn't put people on, we wouldn't ask people to be on the committee that don't have any expertise in that area.
With that answer, does that also mean that there would be one committee per issue?
Hopefully not.
Oh.
The idea would be that that the committee would have these members, and then they would have a charge that they need to negotiate a rule, policy, or procedure. And if that committee can handle multiple parts, it's not let's see. Let me state that better. I envision it, and you can help me. But my vision for it would be that anything that would be connected in some way. So if you're talking about an admission section, there could be, that wouldn't necessarily be every committee would be designated to one small section of that rule procedure. It would be a combined committee that would look at things that are related to that particular issue. Does that make sense? No, not really.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. It's just hard to understand that this committee as a whole presents multiple things. I mean, we represent 2-year and 4-year, but we usually on our subcommittees include the experts on those areas. And so if you're going to be making a change to the 2-year app, it would seem strange to have 4-year people negotiating and making that rule.
Got it.
Or I would add that it would seem strange that a whole new committee be convened to do that when you have a committee in place already that has the expertise to do it 2 years and 4 years. So I'm confused about why the need for a new committee versus one you already have existing.
You're bringing up issues that are well beyond courting. This is statutory decided every session. We're about to start another one, so we'll see how that goes also. But during the 83rd legislature, they made a decision that these certain topics will go under negotiated rulemaking. This is not the only one. There's 4 or 5 other topics that have to be negotiated rulemaking that are separate from what you do in some form or fashion. So some of the questions you're raising, as an agency, we'll raise them too. Well, how do we do this? How do we do that? And we're not sure. We're still sorting that out. But what I can say is some of the things you might be raising, and I just want you to be mindful of this, make sure the items and topics you are raising, not whether they're student-centered, because I think it's a given. I mean, for you all, and I know I've talked to many of you, and I know the work that you do, and for us at the coordinating board, that is where we are. But I want you to be mindful that the items and things you're bringing up fit under the statute from what we were designed to do in the first place. That's the tough part. We've gotten so used to doing things because it's come up for the students, and we know we want to help, and it's worked, but we have not stopped to say, are we even allowed to do that? The original statute only lists 2 applications: a freshman admissions of a freshman student and undergraduate transfer. That's it. But we, in your world, have come up with so many other things that could help kids. Our applications are going up. My whole objective here, my job, is to get more students in school. I have a completion goal. I need people not just 2, but through. So I love it. I run Advise Texas. That's under my purview. Believe me, I'm the last person who wants the change when these applications are going up and kids are loving it. I'm the last person. But I'm here to tell you in my role that statutorily there's been change, and I'm trying to make it work so those numbers don't change and students don't change the way they do business. And they can continue to go. But at the same time, this application and cost has gone down, hasn't it? Maybe almost so much cheaper than other states and where it was when we first started. But the amount that we pay has gone up. It's almost $1 million a year. That somebody took note of that. So the questions you're bringing up are valid, and believe me, Jane and I and Mary, we've been arguing about this for 2 months, and the chair has heard us talk in December. We're still figuring this out. But the statute is clear what we have to do. Now, how do we do it? That's the part that's going to take us a couple of months to work through. And believe me, we're going to have to keep you informed. And we need you to, just like this question calling in and your questions, we need you asking back, how do we do this? Challenge us to think about, well, maybe we don't. Or let's work this through and figure out how we can do that. Because we do not want these applications going down. We do want more kids going to school, going to and through, to all your institutions. It doesn't help the coordinating board for applications to go down. It doesn't help us for all of a sudden just to click a switch and people can't go to college anymore. That's not going to work for any of us. But just be mindful. The changes come from higher up than us, and we're just going to try to make it work. And maybe there is a problem. Maybe we go back to the legislature and say, hey, this didn't work. This has to happen. But right now, this is where we're tasked to do. And I really welcome a lot of your comments. I don't want to lose track of time on the agenda, but I welcome your comments. See me. I'm not going anywhere. Please come see me. Tell me what some of your concerns are. Let Jane and I, Raul's in the back, to write some of these things down and try to vet these out so we can make sure we still do the good work that you all have signed up to do and been doing for years. Thank you.
Tim, is it okay? Short break. Okay. Are there any other questions at this time? Then I think we'll take about a 10-minute break, and we'll convene in, let's see, what time is it? At about 10:25, 26. Thank you.
Dr. Tim Brace here from the Applied Texas Technical Team, and he's going to give us a review of the proposed changes and talk to us about the relative difficulty of each of those changes. Tim?
Good morning. So what I'd like to, I think you all have a subcommittee recommendations list in printed landscape here. These are, what I'd like to do, the purpose of this is to give subcommittees a little bit of a heads up as to the technical team's assessments of difficulty and time spent for the various things that have already been mentioned. And ultimately, of course, it's up to the subcommittees to decide what's important to that group of people and I think to come to the committee as a whole and help them decide what's important in their overall priorities. And this is just, and we also understand that there may be new ideas that come out of the subcommittee meetings today, but this is just to kind of give you a sense of what's major, what's a big deal and what's not, so that you can just talk about them in your subcommittee meetings, and also that will inform the discussion later tomorrow. And we hope that as a result of the subcommittee meetings today, before we adjourn, that we'll hear about those so that we can think about them and bring tomorrow to the meetings some response about some ideas for you all about how easy or difficult those things would be to install. So if we start from the top, with regard to the Common Nursing Applications Subcommittee, there were just a couple of things having to do with concerns. I think at this point we don't have a lot of direction about that. I have done some minor research out there about some of the requests that were made before, but without further information, if this project is to move forward, then we need some strong direction from the board and from the committee as to what the next steps are. So we don't really have anything to offer the subcommittee at this point in terms of their own deliberations. With regard to the graduate application, there are a number of requests. Most of them are minor to moderate, and minor would mean that they're easily done and really shouldn't be, unless there were 105 minor things, we should be able to do pretty much anything labeled minor. They would be minimal effort on the part of the team. I would say not trivial. They're not something to change in an hour, but they would be things that don't take significantly away from the time of the team that we would need to be terribly concerned about them. If I list anything as moderate, that would be obviously more work, but would be something that we could take on and do with a moderate amount of work, and wouldn't be something that y'all would have to say, oh, this is such a big deal that there's only a limited number of other things we can ask them to do. That would be under the major category. So in a given cycle, there would be a small number of major projects that we could take on, because they're going to take weeks to months to install, and so you would need to be careful if you wanted 2 major projects and you wanted 3 moderate projects and 6 minor projects. That's pretty much the whole year for us, the whole cycle. So you'd need to just keep that in mind as you go forward. And if you look at especially the minor ones, unless you just look at them and say, no, we really don't want that, you can pretty much just kind of skip over them and say, okay, those will probably get done. And trivial ones, that are changes in wordings, and some of those may even not need to go to the committee. That was one of the things Jane, I think, talked about today, is maybe it's not a good use of your time to make minor wording changes, and that may be a discussion just for between the board and the team. And then if the board wants to reach out and say, hey, let's let me email a couple of grad schools and see how they think about this grad school wording change. It wouldn't necessarily, we could go ahead and install it if the board asked us to, and you might not need to get into the discussion. The two-year schools on the ATAC, on this committee, might not care enough about it to get into discussions. It might be not an efficient use of your time. But the board might decide, well, I do want to go to the committee because it's controversial enough and changes enough. But anything on here that is minor, all we want you to do is look at it and tell us if you want it. In terms of, I'm looking at the grad application subcommittee. So, we go through, add organization to the and I'm looking online on my list. So I'm hoping it still goes along with your list. High school question could be removed. This is a minor change, removing a question from an existing app. It's just a matter of whether you discuss it among yourselves and really decide you want it. Published checklist or manual for making updates every year. That's something for our help desk to do. Isn't really something. I mean, you can ask for it. It's not anything that would take time from the technical team, but we'd want maybe some direction as to what should be on there. Making the ultimate degree question optional, that's a minor project. It involves probably adding a switch to the admin suite so that people, if you decide you want to recommend that and the committee decides they want it, then the schools should basically determine whether they want that. It's not trivial. We do have to add a new field and a switch to the administrative site, and then the application would pick that up and decide to either display that or not. But it's not a major project. Pick list of countries. I think we maybe already have that. We can install that when an applicant is manually filling an institution. Again, the committee would need to decide if they want that. The ability to receive in separate transmission files, that's really something for the NSC. I think we have a relatively easy way to do that on our side, which is to add something to the EDI that will tell NSC that they want that separately, or what type of application it is. But it would be with the NSC, the National Student Clearinghouse, who is the one that sends the apps to you in EDI after we send to them, and it might involve the institution as well, and setting up possibly a different different directory or something with the NSC. So that's not difficult for us, but might be difficult for the NSC and might involve some significant coordination.
Tim,
yes,
I have a question.
sorry?
I have a question about that. So, how would we go about doing that with NSC?
If you want to follow up with me, I'd be happy to mine my contacts at the NSC and find out. It would, from our end, as I said, it's simple. They already read our EDI and make determinations as to what to do with a file, but we're not sending them that bit of information that says what kind of file other than an application it is. And so they would have to change their processes to look at a new byte we would send them in the EDI to determine type. And then their system would have to say, okay, I'm either going to send this to a new place or I'm going to separate it into a new file so that when you get them, you would get two files instead of one. And then your SIS would have to also be able to receive two files that are separate and know what to do with them.
Sure. I just don't want to lose traction on this, especially if we're going to have to start bringing this to another committee. But this has been on the top of the list for technical for maybe 4 years now. So
I would not agree that it's been at the top of the list because I don't think it's ever been voted as a priority of the committee.
So we
but
would
it's
just
been
need
brought
to vote
forward.
on it.
You're right.
Okay.
Yeah. It has been brought forward and talked about. And even it's part of a larger discussion about getting files either in separating some of the app types into different files and perhaps getting them from the NSC at different times. From our purposes, many of those are not major projects, but getting the NSC involved and getting your own IT staff involved so that they can receive them is probably the larger deal. But you're right that it has been talked about for quite a while.
Tim,
Yeah.
I'll show my ignorance. And this is something I do very well on technical things, so just expect it. I was a Russian major. Doesn't help me with the technology. But would it be possible for you to send the files to NSC separately so that they would have separate files to forward on?
We do that already in certain instances, and they bundle things together.
Okay.
So,
okay.
We don't do it maybe as much separately as people would like, but they already throw things together as it is. Let's see, where are we? 2 fee postings. This is a regular and a late fee. This was again from the grad app. However, it says no recommendation on this, so again, the committee will need to decide. This is probably a moderate, I would say, project. Allow payment options determined by app level. This is, again, a moderate project. The grad level does not accept checks, for example. So that would be an admin switch or something switch that would say, okay, for graduate schools, and do we need to customize that by school? Ensuring grad school, the grad app, an applicant has indicated they would receive a bachelor's degree. This is minor, but again, it would be, do all the schools want this? The more we add the ability to decide individually to the school, we're taking away a little bit from the concept of commonality. We're obviously customizing it, and of course, and it seems to me, just in my experience in working with the grad school at UT, that grad schools tend to be more unalike than undergraduate schools. Did I say that right? So I think you know what I mean. There's less commonality about processes and desires and needs on the grad level than on the undergrad level. So, but that's doable. A new application type, transient app for the grad level. New application types are never trivial. They involve quite a lot of work, and so anytime we add a new type of application, it's a major project.
The column next to the end column needs to be updated to show major. Noted incorrectly on your file.
Sorry, it's on my Word document just fine.
Okay. Okay. I did type a lot.
Okay, that's all right. I've made I've made changes to my Word document, so it could have been my mistake. Any new application is a major project.
That's Russian for major.
Yeah, sorry. That's good. I'm not sure what this educational ladder is having to do with, but it looks like the recommendation is that you use messaging anyway. So that if that changes, we would need to know what kind of thing you're asking for. So that's concerning from the grad app. And then I've got some things at the end of the list too that I'll mention. I don't know if any of them are from the grad committee too, but those are responses to the ones that were on this. The Common Scholarship app, I don't believe there was anything they wanted from us that we're going to do. The Common Scholarship app is there's discussion about its use, how useful it is, how many people use it, how many people don't use it. There's some discussion about trying to see if more people could use it. There's been discussion about trying to see if it would work for the 2-year schools. I think we had a 2-year school that was going to pilot it, but I don't know that they ever actually got it installed and working. We would await instructions from that committee, but at this point there aren't any that came out of this last meeting. Counselor suite as well. There wasn't particular directives coming out of that committee. I know that the coordinating board has some interest in some development of the counselor suite as well. But in terms of this subcommittee, we have not gotten any direction from that. The General Apply Texas application. The data extractions, I believe, has to do with other formats. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if anybody remembers, but I'm guessing that data extractions meant sending an XML or a CSV or something. Okay. And that's another, like sending different files. That's something that comes up every year. I think it's a big deal. We send all of our things through EDI, using EDI through the Speedy server, which does EDI. Now the NSC has been working on a translation between EDI and XML that I believe they're starting to use soon, if not already using with transcripts, but there's not one for application as a type of file. I think that, well, I'll just say that it's a major project, and at this point it comes up every year, and it's enough of a major project that the committee has not decided they want us to spend that much time on it. One of the things that's happening recently is that other vendor products are newer, more recently built vendor products or modernized vendor products are moving into the state, and some of our clients are buying them, and then they don't take EDI. So I've had conversations with several of them, the CEOs and representatives of some of these other vendor products, and I've basically just said we only do EDI. So some of them have created translations themselves, and I don't know what the others have done. If they just said, well, we don't take it, you, the school, need to do something about it. But we at this point have not. EDI is an older but still very much used technology. It is not antiquated, as one person referred to it. It's still very much used and even still in development. But there is a move. There is some, I wouldn't say move away from EDI, but there's more a momentum behind something like XML for use in these kinds of things. But at this point, there is no translation between EDI and XML for applications. That was making a short story long. I don't know. Issues for private schools, I know the private schools are an important part of this community and have issues that come up for them that sometimes the public schools don't have or haven't focused on. So we'd need some clarification on what those are. I've also found that when we've done a couple of things for the private schools, that we have found that some of the public schools have used that, have found those parental information is a good idea, a good example, where once we did that, it was something the private schools brought up, but many public schools are using that now. Visa choices for all applications, and this is just additional choices on the visa pull down. I think that's minor. Concentrations, and the next two are major. They've come up also before. They're doable. They're major, and there are only a certain number of major. So they would take a considerable amount of the time allotted to the cycle for the technical team. I'm not sure about. Let's see. Let me turn it over. Trying to prevent students from submitting multiple times. We'd have to do a look at that. It probably is something that we're not sure how. We need some clarification on how to do that. For example, a student can create a new profile and submit an app to the same school for the same semester, and we can't stop that. And that happens. Whether there are other ways to stop it for people with the same profile, we'd have to look at how we could do that. But it probably would involve an audit of some kind. We would just need to figure out how to do that. I would say it's not going to be major. We're probably either going to look at it and say it's doable within our system or it's not, and then y'all would decide how big a problem it was and whether you wanted to make it a project. Readmit is a new application type. Am I going on? Yes. The next one is not for us. Apply Texas Technical Subcommittee to be part of the general app. That's for someone else to decide. Technical and functional needs. creation of a shortened readmit app. That's a new app type. Unless there was a way to take the readmit app and just have it shorter conditionally, for depending on the student's needs, that would be something we could look at. But it would take a significant amount of research to figure out if that was true. This is a new one which I didn't have before. I don't know that it would be a major. I don't think it would be a major thing. It's just adding pre-pharmacy to the current pre-law or pre-med selections that are already in the app. So we'd have to take a look. It probably is minor. We'd have to take a look at any downstream processing that we might do, but I wouldn't expect that would be anything past minor. Let's see what else is on here. From this list from Elizabeth, most of these have been mentioned somewhere else. So these are probably requests that I guess Elizabeth got through emails. There was a request about the residency tree, and we can take a look at whether we could put together. I think already had put together some sort of sense of how that works within our system, and we can get that out to people so that they can see what how the dynamic nature of that works. There's a question about preferred name, legal name. We'd not want to know a little bit about whether that's simply renaming something, or if it's a new field, then it's probably still minor to moderate, depending on how you want to use it once it's there. A shortened application, if this is a new application type, again, that's a big deal. If it's some sort of dynamic thing within an existing app that leaves out certain things, like we do with some of the other apps where you have modules, that would be moderate to major, depending on how difficult it would be within the existing system. I'm not sure what application sent and prospect module identified as such means. So we'd need some clarification what that means before we can make any decision. Send out notifications, that's for someone else. And then you've got, this is from last time's notes from me. I did do some research about uploading files, and I was talking about cost, and so I really can't go forward until we know what you want. It can be the Amazon Web Services does this for other vendor products, other vendor application products, and it just kind of, the cost is dependent on what you do. If it's simply, uploading something that then is delivered to someone else, that it's all done on a as needed basis, and how many times you log in and how many users you have and these kinds of things. So we really need some direction on what you want to accomplish. It can be expensive depending on what you want to do, but it can also be inexpensive if you're just simply uploading something that then gets sent to somebody else somewhere else on the web, that gets sent to an office somewhere. But it would be outside of our normal application, which is sent in EDI through the National Clearinghouse. Those uploaded files would not be EDI, obviously. They'd be PDF or some other format. Let's see. Oh, the third one is really maybe not necessarily for the committee, but it's just we've started providing 7-day delivery to several universities, and if anybody wants that, they just need to contact us. I believe we sent out an email about that. I don't know if the team remembers that. I think we may have already sent out a general email to the community already and asked who wanted that. So this is kind of old information, but I think A&M found it very useful, and as have a couple of other schools. And it really helped at our peak time on December 1st when A&M and UT both have their deadlines. It really helped our system not be overwhelmed. Let's see what else is on there. I think that's all you have. A couple other things I want to mention for the subcommittees. Another thing that was asked for or was mentioned is an international app for two-year schools. This would be something for, I guess, the general. I don't think there's a specific subcommittee for two-year schools this year. The general app could talk about it, or two-year schools representatives could talk about it. Again, if it's we could possibly it's a new app, so we have to approach it as a major project. It may turn out during our research that we could look at the current international app and the current two-year app and see whether we could dynamically use one of them for this. There was this might be something just between us and the coordinating board. There was we talked about dual credit language, and we've kind of changed it every year, and there was a suggestion for another change to make it just clearer as we, I guess with 2 years ago we installed that, and each year we find that, okay, it works for these people, but these people are confused, so let's change it, and we're still kind of tinkering with it. We have a request. We have a suggestion from the technical team that we add several minutes of grace period to the deadline. The A&M admissions as well as the UT admissions spends a significant amount of time, as does the help desk and even the technical team, dealing with the people who swear they were in there at 11:59 on December 1st, and something happened and they weren't able to make their payment or whatever, and so they're late. And then basically that has to then get kicked to the admissions. The technical team is asked to do research to find out, well, what page were they really on at 11:59 in 30 seconds, and of course then calls are made to sometimes the president of the university. And so we would like to suggest, and the reason I'm bringing it up really is just if anybody else wants this kind of a thing, but we would suggest that if we allowed an extra 5 to 10 minutes to where we wouldn't obviously tell people that, but if someone was in the app, and we wouldn't allow people to necessarily start an app after midnight, but if they're already in there and they're significantly, we can tell what page they're on even. If they're close to being done, web could go down, their computer could freeze, and we just allow a kind of, I was going to say undisclosed, although I guess this is public now, grace period, if that's okay with people. That would be a suggestion from the team. There's a wording changed. I think this came from Michelle as well. That's trivial about other names and aliases. It specifically just kind of says we really need, if you put a name on a test score or something that was different from the name you used, go ahead and put it as another name. It will help us put your files together. The online schools was mentioned. Removing the extracurricular module from the transfer app was suggested. That's not difficult. Making it optional would be more difficult. Removing national merit data from the scholarship app. Removing expected from the high school grad dates. That would be for the transfer, the general app. And I'll go over, this is probably going by you too fast, but the team will be circulating, we may be circling as well. We'll be at least circulating among the different subcommittees, and we can bring some of these things up and have y'all give us feedback, and we can continue to give you feedback as to how difficult these are. And the final one is, again, just informational, and kudos to our new hero, which is Weatherford College, which I think Melinda talked with them, and they have gotten at least four new high schools involved in our TREX initiative. So we've doubled the number of high schools participating, and if any other higher education schools would like to participate, just let us know. I think we have 8 or 10, David, is that about right? 8 or 10 higher ed schools now, and about the same number of high schools. We were getting just such a small number. We believe it's working, but we were getting such a small number of attempts at usage of this option because there were just so few high schools participating. But UTEP had done a great job in getting us the original 3, and I think Blinn got us one, Brian, which is a major user, and then and then the new ones from Weather College, and I'm sorry if I'm leaving anybody else out that helped us, but if anybody else in here or knows anybody who wants to participate, we're open to adding everyone who wants to take part. And this is the TREX project, whereby a student can request a high school transcript within the application upon submission of the app. That's all I got.
If I may, I'd like to throw in a comment, and that is that this is an impressive list of changes that is on the board for consideration. One of the things that comes to my mind as I look at them is how many students are impacted by each one, or how many institutions are impacted by each one. And I don't know the process here. When a suggestion like this comes up, is there any way to identify how many people, students, institutions are impacted with this change? Because one of the concerns that we have that may have generated this decision to add more controls is the thought that they're constantly changing it. All the time, this is changing, that's changing. Is there, does it go out beyond this committee when these changes are being made? I've seen some indication of meetings with nursing groups or deans of this, that, and the other. So I know some of that is occurring. But in general, when you're tweaking the language, does that create a problem for the high school counselor who finally figured out how to explain the last language, and now we have a slightly different language? Is this, Pilar, I'm sorry to throw this at you unexpectedly. Is there a problem with that, or are these typically making it easier for counselors to explain to students? Or do we have a way of knowing how successful these kinds of changes are?
The changes that we make?
Yeah. When the wording is changed, for instance, like the dual credit question, it looks to me like the new language does make more sense than the old language. But do we just, okay, next time you meet, would you maybe change that language again? How much of this do we do, and how much of it is necessary? Because if we are constantly changing what the counselors are trying to explain, are we making it harder for them to do their jobs?
I think that it's kind of a discovery method, because I don't think we get the information out to the counselors or to the users. In this case, a lot of the high schools have other entities that help the actual counselor. And I take back information from here, but that's just an isolated. I just really believe that they just, okay, we're going to look at the new app, let's see what's different, and in filling it out, they discover. I think that's what happens.
That sounds like there is a need for better communication with the high schools about these kinds of changes. Is there a good mode of communicating with them? Is it through the national or the Texas Counselors Association, or is there how do we best update them on the coming changes so they're not caught unawares? You don't have to answer that. But
no, and I'm trying to analyze it as you say, because I know, for example, they're going to have a conference in Galveston, but I know that some of our counselors, they only get $150 to travel. Mm-hmm. And so they go locally to the conference that we're having in February at the island, which is the Lower Valley Conference, because they don't have, some of them are coming. There's a couple going to Galveston, but they're paying their own way, or their school might be paying it. But the Department of Guidance doesn't pay for it. And so some of the people might not be members. So yes, you'll get it out to some, but it will not be the majority of the users. If you send it to the principals, sometimes that doesn't always flow down, just like when it gets to the president of the university, it doesn't always flow down. So I don't know the answer to your question.
Well, I think you had a two-part question. How do we decide to make those changes? Are we making them in response to things we hear? And I can assure you that on our end, we host counselor conferences and we listen to what they say and have made recommendations in the past, but we probably haven't been very, very good at always saying, hey, this did change or this will change, because we learned that during the summer and it's just wild after that. So that we probably do need to communicate that better. As far as tweaking wording, I think we've been doing that in response to things we're hearing from counselors, I hope.
Okay. Well, the communication is something we need to figure out how to improve upon. And it seemed to me that the Texas Counselors Association maybe had a bulletin board or a newsletter that goes out. If perhaps we could ask them if they'd be willing to share an update on the forms that we would send out, the changes that are being made.
What I think might be a solution is that the actual state association would know the regional associations, and thus that's how, if we worked with the state association, counseling association, then and asked them to generate that information onto the regional, so those would at least, because most of them belong to their regional one. It's just that, they sometimes don't pay the dues at the state level, and so I don't know. That's my suggestion.
I would also recommend that we participate in THECB, and that's a great opportunity to provide that information at a conference for counselors.
Does it have a listserv where that kind of information is shared? Great.
Absolutely.
I have a few of our counselors that go to tech. In the Valley, there's very few. But most of the counselors belong to a counseling association. So I don't know.
And I think it's Texas School Counselor Association, do they have a listserv?
No. Thank you.
Okay, I know if that's.
Oh, thanks. We'll explore this, because I think that the communication is really a critical part of this. And I've lived in a different world, so I don't know the connections, and we'll pursue it and see what we can find out. If any of you have suggestions of how we might improve the flow of information to the high school counselors, one of our problems is that we're dealing with a huge state. We've got 1,230 school districts, not to mention the number of high schools and the number of counselors at those high schools. So I think over 9,000 high schools in Texas. So how, communication is important. We just need to figure out, with your help, maybe we can figure out how to do it better.
Can I say something about that? I think you're right. We haven't figured out how to do it better. It has been something we've talked about. It's been on our minds, but I think maybe not as much effort as could be exerted. We suffer a little bit by the fact that the Apply Texas conference is in June. We also, as PLR mentioned, even if that were not the case, there would be significant limitations on the ability of people to travel because of that. I think we did send, I believe, part of our help desk staff went to the TACAC conference. I don't know that a presentation was made, but I believe. So we're trying to make an effort on our end to send representatives to these groups, these conferences, and we're willing to send someone there to make a presentation if that would be helpful, but we would need some direction from, and I guess it needs to come from the counselor community, is how best we can get the information out. Is it done via listserv? Is there an email list? Should we attend conferences and give presentations? Which ones would be the best ones? So it's on our minds to increase that level of communication to be as helpful as we can. We would like some direction on that.
Brian, you mentioned the workshop that is held in June, and I understand it's held at the Pickle Center. Is that correct? Is it broadcast? If that meeting, if the Apply Texas part of the meeting were held at the coordinating board, we can broadcast it. And I don't know if that's. I mean, there's some huge trade-offs between this facility and what they have at Pickle. But one of the reasons we no longer have our financial aid workshops, for instance, at the Pickle Center, is that we can't it's too expensive to broadcast. So doing it here allows those people who are unable to attend to log in and get it. something just to consider as we go forward. And plans may already be in place for this year. We're talking about long-distance kind of things.
The important thing about that meeting, it is a huge meeting, and the room is packed. Big Tex is packed, and there's standing room only, or sitting on the floor room only. And we do break out with our user groups to the other auditoriums to talk about Apply Texas and the way it works in Banner or PeopleSoft or whatever it might be.
Okay, well, and that certainly makes good reason to continue at the Pickle Center, but it may be that we can take the presentations and post them on our website and provide that information. But again, getting the word out to the people that it's there. Maybe working through the region service centers, we can then reach the, anyway, there's networking here that we need to tap into eventually, and I don't need to take more of the time of the group. Thank you.
I was just going to make a quick comment that even our counselor suite, that I know even when I presented to the counselors, all the Valley, with the actual suite, had never seen it, didn't know how to get access. And I know that we're also, we don't have that information. I don't know how to get the information, but that we need to get information.
Yeah.
It's true.
For us, because we can't train the counselors in it. We're not able to get into it.
Can't see it.
Yeah, and that's actually federal restriction.
Sure.
The federal government
absolutely
identified who can have access to it. But we've got to figure out a way to do more training with that. And again, the region service centers may be the best way to get to them and reach all parts of the state. But when we talk about Counselor Suite later on, I'll have a couple of new pieces of information perhaps to share with you that you might find interesting. You were going to bring some counselors. Were they able to come?
No one confirmed to attend.
Okay.
Maybe that's the best route, is the region centers, because most of the counselors, the information on workshops, on sexual abuse, on different things that are happening, and so that goes to all the counselors in the regions. That might be the best venue too.
At this point, we're going to move on in the agenda, and we have 3 subcommittee discussions scheduled for this time. We have set aside some spaces where those 3 subcommittees can meet. There's a space up here at the front and one at the back, and I think we're going to change one of these up front where we're sitting. So we're going to have the nursing application, graduation application, and scholarship application subcommittees meet. If, as the subcommittees meet, if you all would identify someone within your group to take notes so that we can have a recording or some kind of documentation of the discussion at your meetings, that would be preferable. So if we could break out in those 3 committees at this point.
Do you want to designate which space is which?
Sure. We'll just start from the top here. The nursing application could meet right up here. Then at the very back, the graduation application, and then right up here where some of the group is already sitting, maybe the scholarship application committee.
And how long do they have?
Just till 12.
Till 12.
Lunch is from 12 to 12:30.
And if you need to, you can continue working during the lunch break if you want to wrap up.
And are they able to move among the committees as they wish, or do people have assigned committees?
People are assigned to the committees, but anyone who's not assigned to those committees can sit in and give input. This is a good time to do that.